It was a miserable winter day in mid-Ohio. A strong wind was blowing snow and sleet from the northwest, and I was coming down with the flu. I'm a carpenter, and we were working to frame up a house out on a windswept rise. I had been working a lot of overtime lately, trying to get some money ahead to take our kids to Panama City, Florida, over spring break. Money was always tight with us since we bought the big new house a couple of years ago that my wife had to have. I was looking forward to the college co-eds on the beach as part of family R&R down there. Today, though, I was really suffering with a headache, a fever, and the weather, so I told the foreman I was going home. He took one look at me and told me to get the hell out of there before I got pneumonia. I was only too glad to comply, and within a few minutes, I was in my old truck and heading home. I thought about calling my wife on my cell phone, but it seemed like such an effort in the condition I was in. Before I get too far into my tale, I should tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Ron Hardy. I'm 36 years old, 6 feet tall, and weigh in at about 220 pounds. Alright, I was a little heavy, but I like my beer and relaxing when I wasn't working. I'm starting to lose my hair too, but I wasn't in the running for anything new in my love life, so what the hell? The love of my life was now short for Nell, my wife of 16 years. We were in the same graduating class and married pretty much right out of high school and started our married life living with my folks. They had a big old house with plenty of room, so it wasn't too bad. Nell and my mom got on well together, which made the living situation workable. My dad got me a job working with him as a carpenter, and that's where I picked up the trade. Nell now works part-time in a doctor's office, 3 days a week, keeping track of medical records and insurance claims. She brings in a little extra money for the family. Nell is a nice-looking girl, not glamorous but nice-looking. She stands 5 feet 4 inches and weighs around 140 pounds. She carries a little extra weight, like I do, but it looks good on her after having 2 kids. She doesn't look bad at all. I know she can still get me aroused. We had our 2 kids early in our marriage. Brad is 15 and Angie is 13. They're good kids and average students, and we get along pretty well as a family. I tend to be the disciplinarian while Nell is the nurturer. That's the way it should be, I guess. Anyway, I was on my way home early, and it was about 1:30 p.m. on a miserable day. I felt like crap, and all I wanted to do was get home, have a long hot shower, then take a hefty slug of NyQuil and a couple of aspirin, and go to bed. This was Nell's day off, so I could expect a little tender care from her, even though I didn't want to give her whatever I had. Arriving home, I pulled into the garage and noted our car was gone, but assumed Nell had gone shopping or something. After closing the garage door, I stumbled into the house and headed upstairs to our bedroom, in the master shower. I was really looking forward to having that hot water pour over my miserable body. Entering the bedroom, I noticed the bed was unmade, which was odd because Nell always kept a very neat house, and she always had a fit if things were out of place or not neat. I started to strip off my clothes and throw them on the floor when I noticed wet spots on the bottom sheet of the bed, left exposed by the thrown-back top sheet and comforter. I reached down with my finger and tentatively touched it. It was wet and felt slimy. I brought my finger to my nose and was shocked at the smell of a female and also something else. I thought, she's cheating on me. This sure wasn't my as we hadn't had sex for a couple of days. Hell, I thought some more. We hadn't had sex in over a week. I'd been too tired after getting home from working overtime and just ate and crashed into bed. I was in a quandary, but with the fever and headache, my brain couldn't function, so I decided to get my shower and medications and sleep till I could handle this new situation. Damn, I was upset and getting mad by the minute. As I stepped into the shower and let the hot water warm my cold body, that was the only thing that felt good because the rest of me was in turmoil. After drying myself off and getting into my PJs, I took a couple of aspirin and a slug of NyQuil, then began to move my personal stuff out of our bedroom down the hall to our guest room. As I was finishing that up, I heard the door to the garage go up, and I knew she was getting home, and it was about to hit the fan. There were voices in the kitchen now, and I realized she had someone with her. Then steps hurried upstairs. "Oh, you're home," she said as she appeared pale and shaken, looking at me as I was carrying some clothes down the hall. I had to go to school in a rush as the school called that Brad was sick. "Are you feeling all right?" "No, I'm sick too and I'm going to bed," I told her as I continued down the hallway. "What's going on? Aren't you sleeping in our bed?" No, I don't want to give the flu to you, and I know you don't want to give it to your lover. The shock on her face was immediate. What do you mean? Just go in and look at the bed and tell me that isn't what I think it is on the sheet. Oh no, oh God, I didn't want you to find it, but I had to rush to school. What are you going to do? She asked as she sagged against the wall, her face full of tears and anguish. I'm not going to do anything until I can get through this thing I've caught, but you'd better be ready for an explanation and a reason when I feel up to handling it, I told her as I continued into the guest room. Where are you going? I'm going into my room. I'll never sleep in that bed again. You can save it for your lover. And you'd better be prepared to give me his name too. Oh please, honey, don't, I broke in on her. Don't call me honey. As far as I'm concerned, you've broken our wedding vows, and we don't have a marriage anymore. I'll be sleeping in here until I can figure out what to do. Oh God, was all I heard as I shut the door and climbed into the guest bed. The next thing I knew was when I woke and found myself in darkness. My hand went over to the side of the bed where Nell usually slept and found it vacant. Then I slowly realized where I was and began to remember why. Cursing softly to myself, I sat up. I realized I was hungry and found my robe, then quietly slipped downstairs to the kitchen. Turning on the light, I noticed by the clock that it was a little after 2 a.m. I found some leftovers in the fridge and after heating them in the microwave, sat down to eat. Suddenly, I realized I was feeling better, allowing me to think about my marriage. A noise at the door caused me to look up and end my thoughts. Nell was standing there in her night robe. I heard you come down. Are you feeling well enough to talk now? She asked. Her eyes were red, as though she'd been crying. Yes, we can talk. Are you ready to tell me about it? I'll try. I think I know who it is, but why don't you confirm it? I don't think I can tell you that. Then there isn't anything to talk about, is there? I'll move out right away. Please, Ron, it's John. I suppose you mean Dr. John Clemens? Yes. How long has it been going on? About 6 weeks. Do you love him? I don't know. You don't know, and you were screwing him in our bed? The bed where we conceived our children, where I thought we made love, but maybe they aren't my children? I have to give you some hurt. Oh God, no, Ron, don't think that. Is it over? I don't know, I roared. Please, Ron, keep your voice down. You'll wake the children. No, I don't know. Then you want a divorce? No, I still love you, and he's married with 3 kids, the age of ours. He's in the same situation I'm in. He can't leave his family but needs my love like you do. Do you think I'm going to remain while you're off servicing another man? Ron, I think you should know that I talked with a lawyer yesterday afternoon after you went to bed, and he told me that a divorce would end up being terribly expensive for you in this state. Not only would you have to pay for the divorce itself, you'd have to pay me alimony and also child support. You'd also lose custody of the children. I think it would be better if you let me continue my meetings with John until we eventually end our association. She sat there primly and calm now that she had stated her position. I stared at her in disbelief and with mounting rage through gritted teeth, I asked her, do you really think that I will sit back and let you continue screwing your lover and cuckolding me while I work myself to death trying to support you in this lifestyle? Is this going to be your response and position on this? I'm sure when you sit down and think about it, you will see that you may not have many other options. Yes, I believe that is my position. My rage was almost a physical thing as I responded, okay, then tomorrow I will contact a lawyer and see what I can get in the way of a second opinion regarding my options. Give it some more thought, and I will give you my response tomorrow night. Is that satisfactory? I want you to know that I still love you and hope you will let me have this fling because that's all it is, a fling. When it's over, I will be back in a few weeks ready to be your wife again. Let me make this clear, I told her. I will never accept this in any way, shape, or form. How do you expect me to take you back after you're done screwing him and still be able to trust you that you'll never do it again? You have broken the marriage contract we made before God on a whim, and you expect me to believe you'll never do it again? I don't think so. I was hoping we could handle this in an adult, rational way, but I see you want to be stubborn about it. Well, you go see your lawyer tomorrow and see what he says, and hopefully you'll come to your senses. I'm going to bed now. Just remember this, Nell, we've been married 16 years and you should know me pretty well. Do you really think I will accept your position? Good night." She left without responding, leaving me there where I sat, thinking about my situation. By 4 a.m., I had pretty well figured out what I would do. It would just take talking with the lawyer and my parents that day to bring it about. I went back to bed filled with grim determination. The next morning, I awoke around 9 a.m. and proceeded to put my ideas into effect. The kids had gone to school and Nell to work by that time. The first order of business was to make an appointment with a divorce lawyer, which I set up for that afternoon. After eating breakfast, I went over to see my parents and had a long talk with them. They were appalled at what Nell was doing but agreed that what I was proposing was the only way to respond to her and agreed to support me. Next, I went to Nell's parents and made them aware of what was going on in our marriage. They were shocked and couldn't understand their daughter's actions and how it affected our family. After I left them, I called our insurance agent and our family lawyer and made changes in my policy and my will. I then called my boss and talked with him for a while before going down to the bank. It was a very busy day, and it was late afternoon when I finished with a final phone call. I was now ready to meet with Nell and give her my response. While I waited for the kids to get home from school, I began to move stuff to my old truck. When Brad and Angie got home from school, I took them into the den, and we sat down for a talk. I figured they were old enough, and I told them what their mother was doing. They were both shocked and mortified at her actions. I explained to them what was going to happen, and I knew it hurt them deeply, but they understood. I assured them that whatever happened, they would be looked after, and then I drove them over to my parents before Nell got home. Nell arrived home at her usual time, and when she came in the door to the kitchen, I was sitting at the table waiting for her. "Didn't you go to work today?" she asked. "No, I had some things to do." She just shrugged her shoulders and removed her coat. After hanging it up, she came to stand in front of me. "Where are the kids?" "They're over at my folks'." "Have you given any thought to what we discussed last night?" she asked. "Yes, I've given it quite a bit of thought, and I met with a divorce lawyer today who confirmed what you've told me about my responsibilities in the event of a divorce." "So then it's settled? You will let me have my little fling, and we can go on with our lives?" "No, you remember I told you I would not agree to sitting around here or supporting you while I'm being cuckolded. So I've come up with other plans." "What are they?" she asked with a perplexed look on her face. "I'm not going to divorce you." She immediately smiled. "Then how are you going to avoid being cuckolded?" "Well, I might be cuckolded, but I don't think it will be with John. I called his wife today and told her what was going on. I don't think you're going to have a job tomorrow." "Oh, you didn't?" she gasped out. "I've also quit my job." Being now unemployed, her eyes almost bugged out of her head. "Are you crazy? What are we going to live on?" "I think you should be asking yourself that question. What are you going to live on?" "What do you mean?" "I'm leaving you. I'm not divorcing you. If you want a divorce, you can get one and pay for it yourself. You can use abandonment as the cause." "What about the kids?" "My parents have agreed to look after them if you're unable to support them. You may have to sign over custody to them so they can get them covered by health insurance. I've already talked to them, and your parents and mine know about your little fling and what you selfishly proposed. I don't think you're too popular right now with any of them." "How could you do that?" "I'll get a lawyer and get the courts after you if you abandon me and the kids," she added the last as an afterthought. "You can do whatever you want. I'm going to be a long way from here, and you might have to hire someone to try to locate me. I don't think you're going to have the money to do that. And even if you found me, there is no way a court can force me to work if I don't want to. So, you are now responsible for making the mortgage payments, the car payments, and the payments on the new furniture you had to have. I've taken half the money I was saving to go to Florida, and I'm leaving you with my last paycheck, which will be automatically deposited to our checking account. I've also changed my will and insurance policies to make the kids beneficiaries of any proceeds from them. You will get nothing from either of them. When you go to sell this house, you will find that paying off the mortgage and closing costs will eat up most of the equity we have in it. You are an asshole. You are a coward and a very selfish individual. You didn't know when you had it so good, you just wanted more." Standing up, I headed for the door. "Have a good life," I said, walking out to my truck, which I had loaded up with my personal things and my tools. I backed out of the garage and drove away. That day, I drove all night to put as much distance between me and her as I could. I drove all night long until I was so tired I couldn't drive anymore. My direction was south to the Gulf Coast, where construction work abounded. There, I could lose myself in the anonymous life of an itinerant carpenter. I found others there in the same boat as I, constantly moving to avoid discovery by lost wives, lives, and families. My parents kept me informed about what had transpired after I left. Of course, Nell lost her job at the doctor's office, and his wife took him to the cleaners in a well-advertised divorce. He and Nell were never an item after that. Nell found work as a cashier at a supermarket but lost the house, the car, and all the furniture. She ended up in a cheap apartment with no chance of finding another husband to support her since she couldn't afford to divorce me. The kids ended up living with my folks, who raised them. I sent money home to care for them and enough to start a savings fund for their college education. I also sent them cards and money at Christmas and for their birthdays, and kept in touch with them by phone. 7 years after leaving, I traveled back home and was briefly reunited with my kids. Nell had never recovered their love and affection after I left, and they bonded with my folks. They turned out to be responsible people who had learned a lot about trust and loyalty in their upbringing. While I was back home, I went down to the store where Nell was still working as a cashier and took some items through her line. When she looked up and saw me, her shocked face turned ashen. When I asked her, "Are you having a good life now?" she fainted. I left without looking back. I never saw her again. Now, for the second story, it was a cold Tuesday evening in mid-November, and Bruce Finley was still at his office. He was working on a contract that had to be done by Friday. Finley seldom procrastinated, and he was confident he could have it finished as early as the next morning. He neatly stacked the files he'd used and slipped them into the modern-looking mahogany cabinet behind his desk chair. He then locked it. Finley was in his late 30s, fairly tall, almost 6 feet 2 inches, and slim. He had a pale, somewhat angular face. He pulled on his suit coat, then his cashmere topcoat. His wardrobe was a bit more expensive than his income could justify. He ran a comb through his straight, thinning blonde hair and headed out the door. As he took the elevator to his parking level, he thought about his kids, both middle schoolers, and his wife. For weeks, Adam and Julia had given him happier thoughts than his wife Bridget. God, she'd been such a witch lately, he muttered to himself. He thought about the sexy blonde waiting for him at the Hilton, and his mood brightened. He smiled in anticipation. He remembered how hot she'd been the week before, tall with good legs and a great body. She was a few years older than him, but God, she was hot. He'd never had anything like her. She really got into it. Jesus, did she have a hot body? She could almost squeeze him off without him moving. But then, what fun would that be? He chuckled softly to himself. As he headed down the dimly lit 80-foot parking ramp to level 4, looking forward to the coming 2 hours in Suite 606, he strolled leisurely towards his car through the shadows of the ramp. His eyes turned downwards, and his mind was far away. It's just as well Bruce Finley wasn't paying attention. Awareness would not have helped him, it would have only added a few seconds of needless panic before his happy everyday life would be rocked to its core. Uni, he grunted as something smashed viciously between his right cheekbone and nose, jolting his head violently to his left. He felt the sickening snap in his nose. He reeled further to his left, away from a large concrete support pillar. Clinging to a glimmer of awareness, he felt himself being spun around, and his back slammed violently into that same pillar. The next blow hammered into his solar plexus. The impact stunned him, and his mouth fell open as if in a gasp. If only he could gasp. He couldn't breathe, doubly shocked now from the blow to his head and his suddenly paralyzed breathing apparatus. He had no chance to ward off the fierce kick launched upward into his crotch. The blinding explosion of pain hurled him into darkness. He never felt the follow-up punch, the one that battered his other cheekbone and split the outer part of his eyebrow to the tune of stitches. Somehow, this maelstrom overwhelmed him without giving him a clue to his attacker's identity. He'd seen only a hazy image of his tormentor. He could vaguely make out the shape of a man, a bit shorter but broader than he was. His first hint of consciousness was the pain he heard everywhere, and he moaned softly. He couldn't hear anything. Gradually, he became aware of noises. He heard faint traffic sounds in the distance. He was stuck there in limbo for another 20 seconds or so, feeling the dank cold of the concrete floor, when he felt himself being nudged by the toe of a boot. He groaned again, feeling more prodding, several sharp pokes in a row. He moaned in protest. Buddy Finley began to stir a bit, and he could vaguely hear the voice of his assailant. "Hey buddy, you don't look so good." He looked like and would soon look worse. He felt it too. His aching testicles swelled as he shivered helplessly on the floor. "You feeling better?" That damn voice again. Who was it? He wasn't feeling better, aside from the whole consciousness thing. He felt the skin on his face tighten. It would swell like a balloon in 10 minutes. By the next morning, it would be an ugly purple mass, and the colors would soon morph into one more or less disgusting shade after another. "Your nose looks a little crooked. That's not good. You might want someone to take a look at it." Bruce Finley's senses and brain were beginning to connect with reality, the reality that had turned so terribly wrong over the preceding 3 minutes. He opened his eyes when he felt a warm trickle on his hand. He thought it was red. Just how red, he couldn't tell in the dim light. The drips were falling slowly, but from the amount of blood on his hand and on the dirty floor, it must have bled a lot when he went down. He weakly wiped the black cashmere sleeve of his coat across his nose and bleeding eyebrow. "Bruce." That voice was followed by a few seconds interval. "Bruce, wake up, sleepyhead, we need to talk." "Funny." The voice didn't sound hostile now, it sounded light and airy, like someone encouraging him. Encouraging him to do what? 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 It would take 3 more minutes before he could speak coherently. His stomach suddenly revolted, and he began to vomit. While he retched repeatedly, almost nothing came out. That's right, he'd skipped lunch. Finley was lying on his side but could raise his head. He flinched, bringing his forearms up in front of his face when he saw his attacker step towards him. The man roughly slapped his arms away and, with his 2 gloved hands, grabbed Finley's coat, yanking him to a sitting position against the pillar. "Hey, a-hole, do you know who I am? What's my name?" Finley's voice was no longer light and airy, it was harsh, loud, and contemptuous. Finley's very name sounded disgusting and foul. Hearing his own name again finally startled him. He was not just some nameless victim. Knowing that he personally was the target of this brutality spun his mind into another world of confusion. Why? His focus returned when he felt the sharp slap delivered by his tormentor's right hand. He raised his sleeve again to wipe at the blood dripping down his cheek. "Bruce, Bruce, wake up, you stupid weasel. Can you hear me?" The voice was again harsh and insistent. The man stared at his victim with coldly focused attention. He knew Finley was an okay lawyer for a decent law firm in the city. He made good but not great money and had a family. He wasn't a really bad guy. He did have an outsized sense of entitlement. As with most attorneys, it came to him as if a part of his diploma upon graduation from law school. And of course, he cheated on his wife. "Wife, Bruce, do you know who I am?" The words came out slowly, as if directed at a small child. The tone grated in Finley's head. Finley approached full, if painful, awareness. With effort, he directed his attention to the man's face. He was a normal-looking guy, a bit better looking than average, square-jawed with wavy dark brown hair and eyebrows. His eyes looked dark, but then they were in a badly lit parking garage. He was 6 feet or so, and even covered by the wool jacket he wore, he looked very athletic and powerful. Finley had never seen him before in his life. No, I don't think. Who are you?" His words were still slow and slurred. "Are you sure, Bruce? Are you sure you've never seen me before, not even in a picture?" The stranger's look was angry and impatient. "I don't think so, no. I haven't seen you before." He spoke more clearly this time, looking up at him, desperately trying to find some association, some reason to remember him. The man shook his head in exasperation, perhaps disbelief. "That's too bad, Bruce. If someone's going to do something like this to you." He gave a vague wave of his hand towards Finley, indicating his general condition. "If you're going to get the kicked out of you, you should at least know why. don't you think? Finley looked dumbly at the man, not knowing what to say. He watched him pace back and forth for a minute or so. His olive skin, a bit tan, was far from pale, but his grim expression darkened him even more. "Bruce!" He suddenly roared Finley's name at his cowering victim. The ramp was then silent. "No echo in here tonight, is there, Bruce?" He paced some more, restless as a hungry predator. "There are actions, things that you do that cause echoes, Bruce." He virtually spat out Finley's name. "For good or ill, they will bounce back at you. Tonight is your echo, Bruce. I am your echo, and I am enjoying it. Think, Bruce. Think for a moment about why someone would want to do this to you. Can you think of any reason? Have you done something bad at work? Something bad at work? Something that really pissed someone off? Is that it? No, nothing at work. No, nothing there." Every word came with difficulty, the chaos in his brain again slowing his speech. "Really, Bruce?" His voice was low and rough. "There isn't some guy out there who thinks you screwed up his case? Are you sure?" No, Finley mumbled and shook his head. "Well?" His interrogator paced in frustration for a good 20 seconds. "How about your wife? Do you think Bridget could be mad enough at you to hire me? Would she pay me to deliver this little message?" "Bridget? How do you know?" His question died in midair. He was momentarily silent under the blank stare of this stranger. He resumed, haltingly, "She gets mad sometimes," he offered cautiously, "but she'd never do this. Besides, I haven't." His voice trailed off into nothing. The man chuckled softly, as if in sympathy with his victim. "No, I don't think Bridget would hire anyone to do anything like this. I agree with you. She is a real witch though, isn't she? You almost have my sympathies. Dealing with her must be a real chore, or real pain in the bum. You look confused, Bruce. You know, I really know a lot about you and your family. Lovely kids, by the way. You should be proud of them. But I suppose you already know that, don't you?" The man took a deep breath, paced a few steps, then returned to stand directly in front of him. He looked down at Bruce in annoyance. "Well, Bruce, it's not your job and it's not your wife. What have you done that could piss someone off this much? There must be something. What is it, Bruce, that could make someone this furious with you?" The tumblers in Bruce Finley's muddled brain finally fell into place. "Oh," he whispered, "it's Carrie." His heart began to race as he stared at the man who held him at his mercy. "You're Jack Hogan." Hogan stared intently at Finley, shaking his head in wonder. "I hate to say it, Bruce, but you don't seem too smart. Did you really think it was smart to screw another guy's wife? Morality and such aside, without knowing who her husband was and what he might do, what he might be capable of when he found out? Did you really?" He smiled with malice as he spoke. "No, you didn't think at all, did you, Bruce? By the way, how long has your little sexathon with my wife been going on? I'm just curious. I'm sure I could manage good guesses, but humor me." Hogan's last few words were menacingly calm. "Only a couple of months, in early September, yeah? No earlier than that?" Finley spoke softly, as if that would somehow lessen his offense. Hogan mused. "I guess we did narrow it down to the beginning. I just wanted to make sure about that. So, you met my wife for sex over a dozen times, Bruce. The few thumps I gave you somehow don't seem quite enough given the enjoyment you had with my wife, do they?" Hogan was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "No, it really isn't enough. I think this will have some further implications for you, Bruce. I really do." Finley felt his inner sink. "You do know that Hogan Industries does half its legal work through your firm, don't you? I know we're one of Hamilton Ross's 3 biggest clients. I'm sure you know that too." Hogan seemed lost in thought for a few moments. "You're going to leave your firm, Bruce. I'm sure you can understand why, can't you, Bruce?" Finley's stomach ached again, and he sagged lower against the unyielding pillar. "If you haven't left gracefully by the end of January, I'll find a way that's not so graceful." The threat was out there, and Finley had no doubt what would happen. No doubt that Hogan could easily follow through with it. It might be a good idea to find a firm out of the city. It shouldn't be too bad. I hear you're a decent lawyer. You'll get a good reference. Hogan watched Finley as he absorbed Hogan's words. It'll cost you a few years to get back to where you are now, that is. But then that's the price of ending another man's marriage, isn't it? Finley looked up at Hogan but didn't speak. The reason I don't want you nearby, Bruce, is for your own protection. You see, I'm feeling very vindictive right now. I really don't like feeling that way. It's just not healthy for either of us. But if you move, Bruce, then temptation will be out of sight. I won't be tempted to do anything drastic to ease the hurt that the next year or two will surely bring. I don't like being that kind of guy, Bruce. I'm sure you will appreciate that, won't you? Abruptly, Jack Hogan took in a deep, cleansing breath, as if preparing for meditation. Bruce, I'm sorry we had to meet like this, but it had to be done, from my point of view, of course. Let me explain what's going to happen. Finley sat quietly, aching and feeling hopeless about his future, hardly able to listen as Hogan spoke. He glanced upward as Hogan continued. You are going home, and regardless of how you explain this evening and your unfortunate appearance, we have never met. You will go on with your life, carrying this little memory with you. Of course, nothing more will happen to you, not from me at least, for your little dalliance with my wife. Hogan paced back and forth for a few moments, looking at his victim. But Bruce, don't think too much about this evening. Don't be tempted to call the police. That would be a serious error. He was speaking softly by then, like a patient teacher to a student. And you've seen how I deal with serious errors. There will be no physical evidence. In 30 minutes, everything I'm wearing will be ashes. I'll have no marks on me, even my knuckles won't be bruised, padded gloves, you see. I will have an alibi and a set of excellent pictures of your last few episodes with my loving wife. Hogan seemed calmer. He spoke softly and self-assuredly, as he did each day at his office. Finley sat numbly, thinking about the veiled threat of those pictures. Hogan had thought about sending the evidence to Finley's wife, but decided not to. She would have enough difficult questions for him when he got home. Hogan thought about Finley's kids. They would handle a divorce better when they were out of high school. He was thankful his own kids were off at college. He could deal with that later. Hogan went on, we've established that your wife is a witch. He smiled at Finley as he said it. I can't imagine what she would do when confronted with explicit proof of your infidelity. It would be frightening. Hogan's grin chilled him. If I have my facts straight, and I do, she also has more money than you. You have plenty of reasons to stay quiet. Finley looked at him numbly. Any thoughts of revenge were long gone, they'd never even started. One final thing, and our evening will be complete. Hogan glanced at his watch. You need to get a move on to get to the Hilton. You don't want to be late for my wife, do you? What? Why would I? Finley looked shocked and bewildered. You're going to meet my soon-to-be former wife as scheduled. She will see what I've done to you, that you won't speak a word of that to her, will you, Bruce? You won't be staying long, however, you will deliver a message, a very important message for her. At least, first, you will tell her you are never going to see her again. You are going to call her a 304, she hates that word, and a witch. Then you will tell her that you're sorry you ever met her. I would guess that by now it's the truth, isn't it, Bruce? Finley didn't respond. Before you leave her, Hogan continued, you will give her these. He handed Finley a large envelope that held 8 by 10 photos of Finley and Hogan's wife having sex and a smaller envelope filled to a 1-inch thickness. He then handed him a passport, motioning for Finley to put both items in the larger envelope. There is some cash and a credit card in the envelope as well as the passport. There's also a ticket to Mexico City. Hogan smiled to himself, remembering how much his wife disliked Mexico. It takes off at 11 tonight. Tell her she no longer has a husband, tell her she no longer has a family, and she also has no money other than what's in that envelope. Hogan paused for a moment, as if unsure about what he should say next. Finally, he spoke. Tell her that if she is not on that plane, Lopez will pay her a visit. Make sure she hears that. She will understand. This time, I mean it. Hogan paused for a few moments. Tell her not to come back. Ever. Hogan took a couple of deep breaths, shedding the tension of the previous 20 minutes. Finley, do exactly what I said. Remember, I'll be watching, he said, staring at the still-sitting attorney. If I ever have reason to see you again, Hogan paused briefly. Well, you don't really want to know. He spoke those final words sadly, as if he truly feared the prospect of a second meeting. With that, Hogan turned and strode briskly up the ramp to the elevator. He pushed the button, it opened immediately. He gave a quick glance at Finley as the door began to close. Finley watched him leave as he sat leaning against the pillar. A minute later, he struggled to his feet and staggered towards his car. He would perform his tasks quickly and exactly as directed. He was cold and tired and anxious to go home. Story 2. Once, my wife and I went to a dog show. She dragged me there because she'd wanted to choose a small, cute dog for herself for a while, one with a cute face that she could carry around everywhere. There, she could sort of try out a future pet. So, we wandered through a grassy meadow where many tables for pets were set up, with lots of stands and a small track made of carpet where they took the dogs back and forth for a demonstration. This year, the exhibition was in the Central Park, and apart from admiring the animals, there were a couple of ice cream and snack stalls nearby. Regina decided to bring our little granddaughter, who had just turned 5, and Grandma wanted to spoil her once again. Jessica, though still small, seemed to understand everything and, taking advantage of the moment, kept asking for sweets or just to run around the park and play with the dogs. But Regina's main goal was to choose an animal for herself, trying not to give in too much to her granddaughter's requests. Although I admit, we both adored this little troublemaker, and in the end, she won. I noticed a familiar face in the crowd, someone I hadn't seen in a long time, and decided to go say hi. Telling my wife to enjoy herself, I headed towards Adam. I thought we'd be here together, Regina replied. Maybe then take Jessica with you? I'll only be a couple of minutes. I'm sure she'd also enjoy looking at the dogs. Go on. Have fun with her. I smiled at my granddaughter and went to meet my friend. He stood not far from everyone, scrolling through his phone, tapping the screen now and then, probably texting. Hey, Adam. Didn't expect to see you here, I approached and extended my hand. Oh, Bob. Yeah, just came. My daughter wanted to come and see. But you know, I'm not really into all this. So here I am, waiting for her to check out every dog. And you? The wife persuaded me. She wants a dog too. By the way, haven't seen you in ages. Where have you been? Work sent me to another city. Got back a few days ago. I noticed a certain sadness in his expression, as if something serious had happened to Adam. I couldn't say I knew him inside out, but I understood something significant had occurred. Maybe I shouldn't have intruded, but I couldn't help it. Listen, maybe it's not my place, but I see something's happened. Care to share? You're right. It's none of your business, he sharply replied, then awkwardly lowered his head, realizing he'd been too harsh. Sorry. It's just... I understand. I hastened to justify his indignation. No. It's just unfortunate I came back. I got here a little bit before I had planned, glad got there early, bought home some wine and cake. And when I walked in, there they were. In our bed. I understood what he meant, and I felt sorry for him. They looked like such a happy couple. And then this. I never condoned cheating myself. And I couldn't even imagine what I myself would do if suddenly Regina cheated on me. But I guess I've been lucky in that regard. We've been together for so many years, raised our daughter, and now enjoy our granddaughter. Though we weren't too old to spend our days in rocking chairs under a blanket gossiping about others. No, we always kept fit, led a healthy lifestyle, and at my 52 and her 46, we looked a bit younger than our age. Especially Regina, who was obsessed with hiding her wrinkles for as long as possible and often visited salons or stylists. Throughout our life together, she never gave me a reason to be jealous. Although, that's a lie. There was one incident. But that was 15 years ago when we went to my cousin's wedding in another city and misjudged our alcohol intake. Regina fell for the attentions of one of the guests, thinking he found her a good dance partner. But I noticed that he wasn't really interested in dancing, and we had a confrontation. I also had a fight with my wife, but soon we made up as she assured me of her innocence, and upon reevaluating the situation, I believed her. Since then, many years have passed, and we've never brought it up again. It only came to mind now when I heard my friend's story. I never understood why people get married if they're not sure of their fidelity, only for one of the spouses to take a lover in the end. Sorry. I didn't know, I said to Adam. It's all good. I've sorted things out with them. He raised his head slightly with pride and looked away. What did you do? I could only imagine terrible possibilities. Nothing. I punched him, and I divorced her. It's all forgotten. Now, I devote myself entirely to my daughter. I don't want to think about her anymore. I looked at him understandingly, and just then, Regina approached us, holding Jessica's hand. Jessica, in turn, was already licking the ice cream in her waffle cone. The granddaughter enthusiastically started recounting which dog she saw and even made friends with one. It turned out to be a little Bolognese who adored attention and ice cream. Adam, it's nice to see you, Regina politely said and extended her hand while her granddaughter kept me engaged with her stories. Likewise, Adam replied and gallantly kissed my wife's hand. Although I was listening to the little chatterbox, I still paid attention to the two adults standing beside me. For a moment, I even felt a spark of jealousy. But then I dismissed these thoughts, thinking it was just a consequence of Adam's story and a sad memory from the distant past. Well, Regina, have you achieved what you wanted? Are you satisfied? I asked my wife. Yes. We had a great time, she replied, continuing to smile. Then shall we head home? Adam, sorry, I can't chat longer. I need to take Jessica back to her parents, I said. He nodded in response, and we headed to the car. As we left, Regina turned once more, waving her hand to bid farewell to Adam. I didn't pay much attention and drove my family home. On the way, we stopped by our daughter and son-in-law's place, who were already missing their little darling. We stayed briefly, then went home. In the evening, I noticed Regina lost in thought, standing in the kitchen by the table, beating eggs and staring up at the ceiling. She didn't even notice me entering and sitting at the table. Only when the oven beeped a minute later did she snap back to reality. Oh, Bob. Did you need something? She asked, setting aside the bowl and opening the oven. No. Just curious where you were lost just now. What do you mean? I've been here all along, she looked surprised. Not about that. What made you so lost in thought? Did you think of something again? Did you find something at the store already? Regina took out some cupcakes from the oven and, placing them on the table, began to coat the top with whipped egg whites. I noticed she was evading the question, which made me even more curious. I just envision a cute white dog running around the house and cuddling up to my hands, she replied. I dropped the inquiry, although I saw she hadn't told me everything and was definitely not thinking about a dog. I don't know why I fixated on this, but something inside me suggested that my wife wasn't entirely sincere with me. I understood that every woman should have her little secrets, but this wasn't just that kind of case. Regina continued chatting about something of her own while I pondered, and then the phone rang. I picked it up and heard my daughter's upset voice. Helen was almost in tears, speaking incoherently, but it was clear she had an argument with her husband. I tried my best to calm her down, but over the phone it didn't have the desired effect, so I suggested that she come to us and tell me everything in order. She arrived somewhere around an hour later. When I opened the door, I barely recognized my girl. The mascara on her eyes wasn't just smudged by the rain that had started that evening but also by the bitter tears she couldn't hold back. "Dad," she said with a sorrowful voice as she stepped across the threshold. I hugged my daughter and escorted her inside. While I settled her into a chair, Regina appeared in the room, horrified when she saw our tear-stained daughter. Dropping the towel, she immediately sat beside her, embracing her and asking what had happened. "Regina, bring some cocoa. Do we still have some?" I asked my wife, intending to stay with our daughter and be the first to find out about her sorrow. "What's now before cocoa?" Regina replied. "Fine. I'll bring it right away. Sweetie, don't worry, everything will be okay." Regina left, and I sat opposite my daughter, taking her hand. "What has that jerk done now?" I asked. "Dad," she began, sobbing. "He's cheating on me." "What? Why do you think that?" At that moment, Regina entered the room with a cup, and I noticed her face had paled slightly. "Everything points to it. I've suspected it for a while. He's been staying late at work, and today he went somewhere, came back drunk, and I found a motel receipt in his pocket. It's just awful," my daughter cried. "What?" Regina asked, startled, placing the cup on the table. "Are you sure about this? Do you know who he was with?" "If I knew, I wouldn't be sitting here, I'd be tearing her hair out." Regina seemed to exhale with relief, sitting on the armrest of the chair and then embracing Hannah. And I found myself thinking about how much deceit there is in the world. Why do people behave this way? What are they lacking? And now, it had affected my daughter, which angered me. I was ready to tear that bastard apart for what he did to my daughter, but he was far away at the moment, and I needed to calm my daughter down. "The scumbag," I expressed my disdain. "Where's Jessica?" I asked Hannah. "Did she stay with him?" "No. She's actually staying at my friend's tonight. It's her daughter Kristen's birthday, and Jessica stayed there for the night." "Well, at least she didn't witness your argument," Regina said. "Maybe you should stay with us tonight too? I'll prepare a clean bed for you. You'll calm down a bit, and tomorrow things might be clearer. Maybe there's a reasonable explanation for all of this." I looked at my wife as if she had said something absurd. But what else could be assumed here? Everything points to infidelity. We sat with my daughter in the living room for a while, and when she calmed down a bit, she went to rest. I started getting ready to leave, and noticing this, Regina anxiously asked where I was going, trying to dissuade me when I told her I was going to visit the infuriating son-in-law. "You shouldn't worry about it now. Stay with your daughter," I replied and headed for the door. Despite the bad weather, I headed to my daughter's house, hoping to catch that jerk who caused my daughter's sadness. I was angry and furious, mentally preparing myself for a fight, even though I knew he was younger and consequently more agile and stronger. But his actions motivated me, and it gave me a surge of strength. David was home. He opened the door looking slightly disheveled. Without unnecessary words, I immediately punched him in the jaw, causing him to fall to the floor. "Damn! How dare you hurt my daughter?" I asked as he lay on the floor. "What?" he asked in confusion, trying to get up, but I didn't let him and landed another blow. "Why are you picking on me? You should have kept an eye on your wife before interfering in someone else's family." His words made me pause for a moment. Wanting to understand what he meant, I stepped back. "What did you just say? What does Regina have to do with this?" "Answer, you scumbag," I said, preparing for another strike. And only now did I notice that there were already several bruises on him, but I didn't know where they came from yet. However, David, wiping the blood from his split lip, said the following to me. "Do you think I'm the only black sheep in your family?" "Yes. You know nothing about your wife. She's sleeping with your friend. Didn't you know?" Oh. I see it's news to you." "Yes. I found out about it, his wife told me. We've known each other for a long time, and she decided to get back at her husband for his infidelity. He just happened not to return from his business trip on time. His words shocked me. Is this really true? At that moment, I remembered how flirtatiously Regina looked at Adam in the park. But I couldn't even imagine. Now I understand why Adam didn't tell me whom he caught his wife with, because he's in the same boat. Damn. It's all a lie everywhere. I again hit my son-in-law with all my might several times. Due to drunkenness, he didn't offer much resistance. When I thought it was enough and began to feel a bit tired, I left their house and went home. Now I was angry not only with my son-in-law but also with my wife and my friend, and everyone in general. This whole story seemed so tangled to me, as if everyone had conspired against me. But why did Regina do this? And how long has she been cheating on me? I spent days and evenings with her and didn't notice any hint that she was unfaithful to me. I was so immersed in my gloomy thoughts, my eyes fixed on the windshield wipers, which were sliding on the windshield sweeping away the raindrops, that I didn't notice how I drove into the oncoming lane, and only the shrill honk of someone else's car made me wake up and see the headlights shining in my face. I sharply turned right and narrowly avoided an accident. But maybe it would have been better not to. My whole life went downhill in one moment. The people I loved and trusted turned out to be traitors. When I got home, I immediately went to look for my wife. She was sitting in the kitchen, lost in her thoughts. Hannah was obviously already resting, and on one hand, I didn't want to cause a scene, but on the other hand, I couldn't just hold back. When Regina saw me angry, she even stood up, on guard, but she didn't realize that I already knew everything. I approached the table, resting my fists on the tabletop, glaring at her with eyes reddened with anger. But before taking the next step, which would bring unpleasant consequences, I needed to hear it from her. I wanted her to confess to me, looking straight into my eyes. "Bob, what's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," she began quickly. "Is it true?" I hissed in response, feeling my anger intensify. "What's true? What are you talking about?" She obviously guessed what I was referring to but tried not to show her guilt. Her attempt to portray innocence only infuriated me further, and I was no longer speaking, I was yelling. "You and Adam. Is it true? Answer me. Are you sleeping together?" "What? Where did you get that from?" Her face now displayed clear fear. She realized I knew everything, yet she still tried to defend herself. "David told me everything. You fucking whore." I walked up to her and grabbed her hand tightly. Regina grimaced and groaned at the pain. But I didn't care that it hurt. On the contrary, it didn't seem like enough, because she had hurt me so much more. The fear in her eyes showed me that David's words were true, and my wife was really cheating on me. I raised my other hand and prepared to give her a hard slap, at the very least. But that's when Hannah walked into the kitchen and heard us arguing. "Dad, what's going on?" "Mom?" Seeing the unpleasant scene, my daughter understood we were having a serious argument. But she didn't know everything yet, and I didn't know how to reveal the harsh truth about her mother. Lowering my hand, I turned to her. She looked distressed and tired, though no longer crying. I felt sorry for my daughter. It was enough for now that she had learned of her husband's betrayal. Regina sat at the table, flushed with shame and exposure. I didn't know what to tell my daughter, so I simply left. Maybe deep down, I hoped Regina would confess everything to her when I was gone. But that thought later seemed naive. She had hidden everything so carefully for a reason. Nevertheless, I left them and exited the house. I stood on the threshold in the rain for a couple of minutes, as if hoping it would wash away some of my pain. But I only got soaked and headed to my car. I intended to meet Adam and unleash all my anger on him. However, I remembered he had a young daughter at home, and I didn't want to cause a scene in front of her. Taking my phone, I dialed his number, figuring out how to lure him out. He answered almost immediately, and I asked if he could meet me. But as I suspected, Adam said he was with his daughter and the weather wasn't great. I didn't know if he noticed my anger in my voice, but I didn't care at that moment. I insisted on the meeting, telling him it was crucial. It seemed Adam believed me. He said he could come in about an hour. He needed to persuade a neighbor to watch his daughter and suggested meeting at the bar where we sometimes hung out. I agreed but didn't wait for him at the bar. I stayed in my car in the small parking lot, watching for his car to arrive. Around the agreed-upon time, I noticed Adam pulling into the parking lot. Without wasting time as he prepared to get out of the car, I rushed to him. And as soon as he opened the door, I immediately grabbed him by the collar, pulled him out of the car, and pressed him against it. "Bob, what are you doing?" he asked in confusion. "What? Are you still asking? I thought you were my friend. And you? How dare you mess with my wife? You scumbag!" I shouted and struck him with all my might. Taken aback, he staggered down. But I saw strong surprise and confusion in his eyes. "What are you talking about?" he protested as I intended to hit him again. "What about your wife? What did I do?" But I didn't listen to him and struck him hard once more. I knew he wanted to talk himself out of it, hoping I'd believe him. However, I already knew the truth and wasn't going to forgive him. Now I considered him not only a betrayer but also a lying scoundrel trying to conceal his guilt. I prepared to strike again, but apparently, Adam didn't want to be beaten anymore and started fighting back. He realized there was no reasoning with me at that moment and began defending himself with fists. Under the pouring rain, we wrestled for some time, occasionally falling to the ground in the mud but getting up again and continuing the attack, using hands and feet. Unnoticed by us, we reached a small ditch behind the parking lot. And after another blow I dealt to Adam with my fist, he lost balance, slipped on a patch of mud, and fell into the ditch. I approached the edge and looked down at him. He lay there motionless, and then next to him, I noticed several pieces of an old root sticking out of the ground, starting to turn crimson from Adam's blood flowing onto them. It seemed like I had accidentally killed him. For a moment, I felt sick, the consequences were clear, and I could end up behind bars. At that moment, I didn't know how to fix the situation and was already devising a new plan to hide the body somewhere. But I needed to make sure nobody had seen us. Though who would want to hang around in such weather and watch someone else's fight? Then I noticed Adam barely move his hand. I took a closer look, he was definitely moving. So maybe it wasn't as dire, and he was alive. I crouched and slid down to him to check on him. Adam opened his eyes but squinted as the raindrops hit his face. He weakly said to me, "You idiot. Where did you get the idea that something's going on between your wife and me?" "David told me everything. He confessed he slept with your wife, and you caught them." "What?" Adam wanted to laugh but winced in pain, placing a hand on his side. I looked closer and noticed a piece of the root embedded in his body. Despite the wound and the pain, Adam continued, "David? Your son-in-law? Where did you get the idea it was him with my wife? I don't even know that bastard. I never touched your wife." He winced in pain again. But how could this be? Did I make a mistake? Or was Adam just trying to wriggle out of it again? Now I remembered that David didn't mention any names, he just said it was my friend, and I had many friends. Then who dared to sow discord in my family? Looking at the bleeding Adam, I felt sorry for him. Besides hoping he was telling me the truth, he had been my friend for many years. I quickly took out my phone and dialed for an ambulance, taking off my jacket and pressing it against Adam's wound to slow the bleeding. In that moment, I even felt guilty towards him. Adam saw that I was still sitting there, waiting for the medics. He told me to go. Even though I refused, he insisted, saying he'd claim he fell himself. He advised me to go home and sort things out with my wife. Listening to him, I got into the car and drove off. I needed to find out who really was my wife's lover. Those bastards had made a complete fool out of me. I decided to visit David again, hoping this time he'd tell me everything. Last time, in a fit of rage, I had left too soon without getting all the details. When I stood on the doorstep of my son-in-law's house again, nobody answered, and it was dark inside, only the hallway light was on. I knocked a few more times, and when I was sure nobody would open for me, I approached the window, hoping to see something. There was no movement visible. The window itself was unlocked, and I decided to take advantage of it. Entering the house, I moved forward cautiously, trying not to make noise or reveal my presence. But after some searching, I realized there was no one in the house. In their bedroom, I noticed that someone, apparently David, was packing in a hurry. I dialed David's number, but he didn't answer either. I didn't know what was happening now, but it was clear that David had simply fled. But why and where? Did his conscience bother him? I didn't dwell on it and went back home. Now, I could only find out the truth from my wife. Regina was sitting in the living room, visibly upset. When I entered, she shrunk back, thinking I'd lash out at her. But I simply approached her and sat opposite. I stared at her intensely without saying a word. This made her feel uncomfortable, and she decided to speak first. "Bob, what happened? Why are you so worked up?" she asked. Something snapped within me, and I couldn't hold back. "What happened? Are you serious?" I started shouting. "You fucking whore. Tell me. Who are you cheating on me with? Tell the truth, or I won't be responsible for myself." I even stood up a bit. This time, Regina was quite frightened by my actions, and pressed herself against the back of the sofa, trying to answer me. But her breath caught in her throat, and she could only stammer. "Bob, he just... What? Are you a broken record? Answer properly. Who is it?" I was barely holding myself back, and at that moment, I didn't care if our daughter might see us. "It's David." "What?" I was completely shocked by what I heard and couldn't believe her words. "Is this really true? But he told me that it's my friend. Who should I believe now?" But looking at my wife, I saw that she was really scared and obviously couldn't dare to lie to me. I jumped up. My first impulse was to rush to her and give her a slap. But instead, I just paced the room, holding my head in my hands, trying to understand why this happened. At the same time, anger was bubbling up inside me, and I could barely contain myself. "Speak," I turned to her again. "Why? Why the hell and for how long? What the hell, really?" Regina guiltily lowered her eyes, paled, and her lips started trembling. She tried to force out an answer, but her words had ended up as meaningless muttering again. That's when I couldn't hold back, approached her, grabbed her by one hand, and repeatedly hit her face with the other. Red marks from the slaps remained on her cheeks, immediately covered by tears. Regina glanced at me and then away, while I thirsted for answers. In the end, she told me that she and David had been secretly seeing each other for over a year. At one of the parties, while they were dancing together, he involuntarily put his hand lower on her back, and she, feeling his strong young hand, succumbed to temptation and responded to him that same evening. That's when their affair started. But she still loved our daughter and didn't want to hurt her, so she and David agreed not to tell anyone. I was shocked by what I heard. At the end of her story, Regina softened a bit, as if after confession, hoping that I would leave her alone now. But the accumulated emotions, and now this confession, caused all my rage to burst out, and I struck my wife with tremendous anger and hatred. She flew to the side and landed on a small table, the glass top of which shattered under her weight, and Regina fell onto the shards. And I just stood there, looking at this shameless woman. Then I glanced and saw our daughter in the doorway, horrified, covering her face with her hands. I didn't want her to find out about everything like this. But it was too late to take it back. I didn't know what to do now and just sat on the couch. Regina began to get up from the floor but immediately fell again, turning onto her back. And now I noticed that one of the shards was sticking out of her abdomen. Hannah also saw this and immediately rushed to her mother, screaming and crying. But for some reason, I was absolutely indifferent. Because of this woman, everything I believed in was shattered. I almost killed a friend who turned out to be innocent. And now I felt guilty only towards him. Regina was taken to the hospital. Hannah called the ambulance while I was lost in my thoughts. And when she came up to me, shaking my shoulders and shouting at me, asking why I was so cruel, I looked at her angelic face, and it hurt even more. For a moment, it seemed to me that she was defending these traitors. "Haven't you heard what she said?" I asked. "Your husband cheated on you with your mother." And then I felt a tear roll down my cheek. I didn't know what I felt most sorry for at that moment, that I was betrayed, or my daughter, or my friend who suffered for nothing. But at one moment, it became very bitter for me. I looked again at my daughter, who seemed to be in shock from my words, and I hugged her. I thought that at that moment she would reject me and start screaming again. But she just pressed against my chest and quietly cried, realizing the cruel truth. The next day, Hannah still gathered herself and went to visit her mother. She suggested I go too, but I refused. I didn't want to see her. Instead, I talked with my daughter about David, and together we started thinking about where he could have gone because he didn't answer her calls either. David just disappeared somewhere. And a little later, when Hannah drove to the hospital and needed to pay for treatment, she found out that all the accounts were empty. There wasn't a cent on them. Hannah came back to me and reported it. I didn't hesitate long and reported it to the police. David wasn't found until 2 weeks later. Hannah filed for divorce and pressed charges against him. He was awarded a few years, thanks to a good lawyer Hannah hired. Turns out he wasn't just having an affair with my wife, he was charming rich women and getting rich off them. And the husband of one of them caught him one day and beat him up. I wanted to visit him in prison and smash his face in his face again for what he had done to my daughter, but during the visit we were watched by huge guards, so I abandoned my idea, taking comfort in the fact that his life was already ruined. But I learned from him that he wanted to get to Regina's accounts, too, because we had accumulated quite a lot of money over the years, and he didn't care if it was for our granddaughter's future. I also visited Adam, and each time, I apologized to him for my rash act. But he only laughed at me, saying I was just a silly old man, but still fighting for his family's honor. He and I made up, and I was happy about that. And also that Hannah, who had visited with my friend a couple times, noticed that she liked him, even though he was a few years older. It's been 2 years since then. I divorced Regina. She went to live with her relatives, and the only thing I was grateful for was that she didn't press charges against me. Obviously, she knew it was her fault. And Hannah married Adam, and now I had another grandchild. I didn't let Regina visit anymore, but I still noticed that Hannah sometimes chatted with her and sent her pictures of her grandchildren, because she was still her mother.